Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Phillipa, tohu ko Ikua. I'm really excited to be able to share with you some of the learning I've been doing around game design in the classroom. It's something I've been exploring with a range of age groups. And I can imagine that for some people, it may be something that seems slightly intimidating, or they're not quite sure how it can fit into their curriculum. So I'm hoping that I can answer maybe some of those questions that you may have around getting game making going in your classroom. So first of all, I just want to share with you some information about the state of the New Zealand game industry. It's growing. We have a lot of game development companies across New Zealand. And within those companies, there are a mixture of roles and jobs. So what's nice is that you have kids who might particularly be interested in one field like art, then they can look at art inside of game design as an option for future pathways. You might have some people who are interested in administration that want to work in game design. There is a role for them there. There's marketing, there are scientists, all sorts of people can get involved in game design. And as I say, it's a growing industry in New Zealand, and it's really good to share that with kids because often they will see game design as something that happens in other countries around the world. Here are a couple of local examples. So I live in Otipoti, Dunedin, and I guess sometimes you'll find some resistance from people around game design. They see there's a lot of negative press around games, and it's really just another tool in the toolbox for if you want to solve problems and to create. And that's what I love about them. So here are two examples from some companies in Dunedin. So Balancing Monkey Games is a smaller sort of boutique type game development company. And so their mission is to make peaceful, accessible and exclusive games that enable them to support their local community. So a really positive, community focused goal. Runaway Play, who are one of my personal favourites and I've had a bit to do with, their goal is around being the leading global brand in nature games, and their growing collection of games are based around nature and understanding the natural world, and they employ scientists to make sure that their games are as accurate and educational as possible. When you go into game design, as much as you may think that kids spend a lot of time playing games, they actually need to then explore some games with a little bit more focus, and that's your job as the teacher to help them with that. An example is, this is Banana Time. So Banana Time was created by a student that I used to work with. When I share it with kids, I don't tell them anything about the person who made the game. I ask them to tell me who they think made the game, where they might live. And the kids always think it's someone from overseas. They're from America, they're from England, they're from China. They never think that it might be someone right here in New Zealand. So when I share with them that it was made by a 10-year-old girl at a school, a small school, 60-student school just outside Dunedin, you can see it kind of clicking with them that, so it's not, I could actually do this. I could be someone who, like this girl, managed to make it onto the front of the scratch page. And as a consequence, last time I checked, had over 57,000 views. Now, she put this on 2 or 3 years ago. And what's nice to see is that the comments are still coming in, and they're all really positive comments. Lots of people just posting their scores, showing that people are still continuing to engage with the game. Quite a few people have remixed the game. I like that in the comments, some people are giving her some feedback. So they're saying, look, you could add music. And so she's engaged with them and said to them, how can I do that? And they've helped her. So it's that real community of learning as well. Scratch is a tool that I use a lot, and I really like the way that it operates and the way that it can work for young people in making games. So that's a start. Banana Time's a game. It's very simple. It's a little bit addictive. It's a bit like Flappy Time, I guess, for those people who are into that kind of game. And having a look at it and asking questions is, do you want to keep playing the game? Why or why not? So there'll be some people who will be absolutely obsessed with it. There'll be others who could take it or leave it. And so it's looking at, what are the understanding that not everyone likes the same games as you. What level of challenge is the game? This is important too, because some people will stop playing because the game's too easy. Some people will stop playing because the game's too hard. And it's like, has the game got it just right? It's a bit like Goldilocks and the Three Bears in the porridge. And then thinking about what would you change about that game to improve it? because sometimes it's very challenging for kids to come up with a whole new game concept. So it's a little bit easier for them to start with a game concept that they're familiar with and then think about how they could improve it or add value to it. It's a little bit like when we used to make some of you may still do it, making the cardboard board games and so on. You often get many versions of Monopoly, but they put their own sort of spin on it. When you're looking and exploring games, this is where, as I said before, you need to sort of add your the teacher point of view, which is actually looking at the elements of good game design. The first one is, what is the goal? What is the objective of the game? How do you win? And is that something that makes you want to win? So I've listed some examples here, which include just simply crossing the finish line, completing all the levels, beating the other players. Often players are motivated by high score charts. You need to collect all the game pieces. So, and it needs to be clear to the player right from the start what their goal is. It may be a time-based challenge. The second element of game design is thinking about your characters. So there's usually a one player character, and I'm going to say keep it that small for when your kids are designing the games, especially if they're going to be coding them, because the more characters you add, the more coding you have to add, the more artwork you have to add, the more animations you have to add. And so the kids will start to realize that for themselves. So it's up to you if you want to let them find that out for themselves or make it set up some parameters right from the beginning. They are used to very high level, complex games that are developed by teams and teams of people. And they need to understand that as beginner game designers, they need to keep their games extremely simple. So yeah, keeping the characters small is something I definitely recommend. There are two types of characters. There's the main character, which is your player character, and then there are non-player characters. So those are characters that are kind of controlled by the game. They can engage with the player, and they might be good characters that help the character, or they might be characters that are enemies. The third thing to think about will be items and objects. So items in a game are things that can be picked up and used by the player. So that could be collecting health or collecting gold coins. Objects are things which the player can interact with, but they can't pick them up and carry them around. Okay, so it's about going through a door, clicking on a picture that reveals a clue. Or it might be a wall in a game. The next thing to think about are what are the rules of the game, and keeping those rules really clear. So by playing a few games and exploring what the rules are, this will help the kids to understand what types of rules they may want in their games. So examples are there are only 3 lives, or that you have 1 minute to solve all the challenges, or that you need to be able to collect a key in order to get through a door to get to a treasure chest. Challenges. When you're just creating your very first starter games, you may keep the level of challenge pretty simple. But the challenges are the things that get in the way of the player achieving their goal. And so it may be like a portal that takes them back to another level, like in Snakes and Ladders, when you go down a ladder, up a ladder and down a snake. So go down a snake. It may be that they have to solve a puzzle before they can get on to the next part. And so those challenges, it could be if the kids are creating a game where they want to teach people things, it might be that they have to answer a quiz question before they can move on. Playability is a really key element, and this is the thing that game design companies probably spend the most time on, because they want to create a game that people will want to come back and play. If you don't do that, then your game just goes out into the world, no one plays it, and your goal is not really achieved. Like I referred to before, a lot of it is tied up in the level of challenge. So it's about what engages the player in staying in the game. Is that because it challenges them just enough? What stops people from wanting to play a game? So not everyone's into the same kind of game. Some people might be into like a Space Invaders type game. Other people might be into match 3 slider puzzle games. Other people might be into role-playing games. So we're getting the people in the class to listen to each other and understanding that different games engage people in different ways. And so when they're doing their planning, that's when they need to think about their audience, but we'll talk about that shortly. This is a really good resource site to go to. So Gamefruit is a piece of software which was developed right here in New Zealand by Dan Millwood and his team, and it is a piece of software that students can learn to create their own games with using coding. And this website here was done with some work with Jared McManus, and it's around developing resources to support you through game design. And there's some really good stuff in there, and a lot of what I've done has come out of looking through that. And I think that's a great place to start if you are looking for somewhere to sort of scaffold you through this process. This is another place you can go. This is more if you want your students to work within Scratch. By going through these lessons, they will develop their skills. And although it says advanced, I've used it sort of year 5 to 8 with no issues. The kids find it quite achievable and doable. They don't have to do all of them. They can just do some of them. And it gives them an idea of what's involved in actually making games, so that they can then, rather than trying to dive deep into a game and code it, they can actually work out which code they feel more comfortable with and the elements they do and don't want to add into their game. So then it comes to planning the games. This is where we come back to the classic human-centered design thinking. So who is my game for? What are the interests of that group of people? So it may be they're designing a maths game for 5-year-olds in the school. So going and looking at what types of games do they enjoy? What are their interests? Which kind of characters might hook them in? Why? Why am I making this game? Is it to teach others something new? Is it to raise their awareness about something? Is it for them to improve in a skill, or is it just plain entertainment? And where is my game going to be set? Because that will help with in designing the levels, and if your game has levels, or designing the backgrounds, and it will classically it sets the scene for the game. Here's an example which I did recently with some year 5 and 6 students. They were working on a project which was the Mataranga project with Ian Taylor, and they were looking at the first explorers to come to New Zealand, and we were looking at how could we design a game that would teach people about the first explorers and about the journey that they went on, and when they came through and to live in our country. And we found that it worked best when we split them up into game studios. So we had, I think, maybe 5 studios in the class. There was a CEO, and I'd have meetings with the CEO. There were people who were in charge of the art. There were people who were in charge of the storyline of the game, and then there were people who were in charge of the coding. And so it was nice to have those different roles. Everybody contributed to everything. So the artist, the people in charge of art, would still get other tamariki in their group to join in with the art process, but they had the final decision making to do. And I would meet with them in workshops and upskill them in aspects of digital art and animation. So you can see some of the characters here in the backgrounds and the objects that some of the students created. The game design studios, we set up a Google Drive, and each game design studio had their own folder in that drive, and that's where they stored all of their game assets. So you can see some of the characters that got created, and I'm going to talk about some of the software that was used for that later on. We've got some of the backdrops here that they used and some of the objects. We also talked about how to animate the characters. So we decided that our main player would be animated at least, so that when they're walking around, it actually looked like they're walking. So I talked to them about 2-frame animation. So for that means you actually only need 2 images of your character. And then when you're putting them into Gamefruit or Scratch or whatever software you're using, that means that then the character flips between the 2 images, and it makes it look like it's walking. Brush Ninja is a piece of software I used to support some of the kids with that. Some of them did it directly into Scratch. Others had other software that I used. And that's why I listened to the kids, because a lot of them are doing some of this stuff at home, and then they don't bring it into the school setting. So I like to talk to them about what do you do. And there were some kids in the class who digital art's what they do at home, and they showed me some apps on the iPad that they use and that they were comfortable with. So that was really good to learn from them as well. You can see here the very first beginning parts of the game. So just getting the characters to move around and to interact with things in the environment. So the one on the left, the character can go into the house, and when the character goes into the house, it changes scene. The one on the right, the job of the character is to go around and collect wood, and you need enough wood to make your waka before you can go out onto the ocean and head across to New Zealand. Here's some more. This is the one on the left again, also is about collecting wood to build the waka, and it had the house that you could go into and explore different rooms. The one on the right, I particularly like. It looks quite dark because it's set in a cave. And the nice thing about Scratch is that it has a translate function. And so if you've got any children in the class who English is not their first language, you can translate the whole of Scratch into whichever language is their first language. And that's something I love about Scratch. So one of the students in the class worked out a way in which he could code it so that if a player pressed a particular key on the keyboard, it would translate everything in the storytelling into te reo, which I thought was fantastic. We used a variety of art apps, and Clicky's one I've used a lot for. This is mainly for classes. If Chromebook's your only tool, Clicky is the best free software I've found that kids have engaged with really, really well. I'm always open to hearing about more. I'd love to hear about more if anyone knows of any. Pixel art we used for creating the pixelated style. So some kids wanted to use that as the style for their game. And then, as I said before, a lot of kids already knew about some apps and they were teaching me, and we just explored different art apps. And that was part of the process, was finding out which art apps they did prefer to use. And like anything, some would prefer one and others would prefer something else. So that was a bit of it. We just explored our way through that process. In terms of software, I've talked about Scratch and Gamefruit. I think those are both great starter products for the very basics of getting kids into coding and creating something that they can feel proud of and it does what they want it to do. And I would highly recommend them. The other thing is, they work on Chromebooks. Game Maker, Game Star Mechanic, and Stencil are other options that you can look at if you wish. Though a couple of those are downloadable, so they don't work so well on Chromebooks. So that's a heads up on what I've been up to with game making. It's a very much a surface level introduction to game design, but I'm very happy to be contacted. I'd love to see some of the projects that you've been working on. I guess the thing I loved about the project was that the kids just kept asking to do more and more. They were so engaged. The teams worked really well together because they had their roles. We had lots of learning to do, and sometimes the learning went off in different paths, and we had to, before we could come back to the main objective again. And I would advise that if you're going to do this, just try it simply first, but then I would actually put aside a whole term for it and basically turn your class into a game making studio. It's a really great way for kids to understand how games work, how to work collaboratively, and it's certainly something I'll be trying again.